Alright guys, welcome back to the video. So we're going to be doing this in a little bit of a series format here. I want to try and get a little bit more detailed in my woodworking videos so that you guys can hopefully learn a little bit more than just kind of watching me make a project. So how this is going to work is I've got 9 videos planned out for actually building this project that we're going to be getting on to. And then at the very end, the 10th part of it is just going to be a kind of a final compilation video, just going through the entire process with a little bit of voiceover. That'll just kind of give you guys a better general look at what it is. But if you're interested in the details of each section and each component of this project, then definitely subscribe and check out each of the videos that's going to be coming up very soon here. So what we're going to be building is a walnut tea cabinet. Now, full transparency, this isn't the first one of these I've built. This is a product I've been hoping to add to my online store, but I've gone through and I've built a couple different ones, kind of working out the different designs and features now that I want in them. So the one that we're going to be building in this video is the one that is actually going to be ending up on my website, and you can purchase one if you would like. And so we're going to be making this out of fake quarter sawn walnut. Now, this video is going to be all about how to make that fake quarter sawn walnut, the panels and that. And it's actually a really cool technique, and here's how it starts. So this is all the wood for this project. It's 2 chunks, both 2 feet long, of 8/4 by 8-inch wide walnut. Now this stuff is not cheap, so I really don't like messing up with it, and I really don't like wasting it. So this is actually a very simple process and gives you a very good, easy look. And it's great if you're a small shop like me and you don't have, extra large jointers. Like my jointer is 6 inches. I can't joint this 8.5-inch piece of walnut. It just doesn't work out like that. And so even though I'd love to work with wide pieces, I can't. So this fake quarter sawn panel technique is where this really excels. And so there's a couple different ways you can go about doing this. The basics of it is that you're taking an 8/4 chunk of walnut like this, or any wood really, and you're just cutting strips off it in whatever thickness you need. Then you're turning them over and gluing those strips back together. And the reason this is fake, I call this fake quarter sawn, is because it basically looks like quarter sawn walnut. It has very clean, straight grain, and overall just looks spectacular. And you guys will get to see that once we do the glue up at the end of this video. And so it's a really cool technique that I really like. And not only is it very beautiful, it's also very functional because you are basically faking quarter sawn walnut. So you're getting the minimal amount of movement from quarter sawn wood. And that's the biggest main benefit that I found, is that you can do a lot of stuff that you can't do with just normal face grain wood like we got on like the pieces are right now. And so there's a couple different principles in doing this. You can either start it with just rough stock, cut off the strips on the bandsaw, and you want to make sure you're using the bandsaw for that because the table saw would be a little bit dangerous if your stock has any twist or cupping to it. And so then once you have those rough strips, you can then take them over to the jointer, joint the face, joint the edge. That's a very time-intensive process. It's the way I did it for a long time until I kind of thought of this different way to do it. And it works. It definitely works. You have a nice small 6-inch jointer, planer and all that. You can get some really good results doing it that way. And so the way I'm going to be doing in this video is I'm going to be taking both of these chunks, flattening one face, then flattening the other face on the planer, and then jointing an edge. And then I'll show you guys how to use both the bandsaw on the table saw to cut the strips for our panels and all our other pieces in this project. So the first step here is to flatten the pieces. Now you can see I've got my router flattening jig set up here. All this is a 3/4 inch piece of MDF with the sides and the factory edge ripped off nice and square on both sides and then screwed onto the side to give a perfectly parallel platform for the actual router sled over here to ride back and forth on. And so all I have done in the inside to hold these pieces down is I've got a couple pieces just stuck down with double-sided tape. And so the large 2x4 on the front and the small piece of 2x4 on the back side are just creating the clamping pressure using a bench dog on the far side and this little Veritas clamp that I have built into my bench. And you want to make sure when you're doing this kind of slab flattening style stuff that you are securely holding down these pieces, otherwise things can get a little crazy and go flying on you. I've had that happen a couple times, not fun. So we're going to try and prevent that as much as possible. And so it's actually really easy, and this is easier than the ways I've done it in the past, where having these actual clamps on either end. You just got to make sure they're opened up nice and wide, and drop your piece down between your 2 side pieces, and turn the clamp a little bit. And again, it doesn't have to be held in there like super tight, but you want it fairly tight. And so luckily these pieces are fairly flat. This is a good time to check with whether or not you have a little bit of twist or cupping or whatever you need. So I've got a little bit, but not a lot. And so all I'm looking for is just gaps underneath where I can put some little shims in. And these are just, I think they're called stair tread shims. You can buy them at Home Depot. They're like $1.50 a pack. And they just work really well. They're nice, cheap, soft wood, so you don't have to worry about them denting anything that you're using. And yeah, you just find little air gaps, put them in, and then you just got to keep checking your piece. And so the most important thing is that your piece is held securely. It's not rocking around. You can push down all the corners, push down on either side. Feel it in the middle too. Nothing's moving. So now I'm good to go about flattening it with my router. And so on the router, you can see I've got a 2-inch slab flattening bit. It's a pretty big guy right there. And this is the Bosch MRP 23, something like that. If you want to see my video where I talked about this router and other routers like it in specific, go check that out. There will be a link in the top right corner there. But anyway, this is what I'm going to be using to flatten these pieces. And so I've used this bit quite a lot, and I really like it. It's just a cheap one off Amazon. I'm not going to give the brand name or anything like that because they're a dime a dozen on Amazon. But yeah, they're not expensive. They work really well. But you do need to have a variable speed router and a pretty decent horsepower. This one's 2.3. And the most important thing is I want to make sure I'm not taking off a massive chunk on the first cut. In fact, I want to be just barely touching. But all I'm going to do is I just want to lower the bit just enough so that it's just cut it. You can see just a line forming on the surface. Now that's a little bit more. And that's perfect. So I don't want to be taking a big gouge. And so using the little adjustment dial on my router, I'm just going to set it to 0. And so because I know my bit is just referencing the top of the surface of this wood, I'm going to go down just a 64th. That way I'm taking off a decent cut, and anything more than that, I can just keep working my way forward. But I know that initial 64th that I'm taking off is not going to be a nasty amount. It's not going to clog up the bit, not going to do anything crazy pushing around the wood. It's going to be a nice safe amount so I can get an idea of where and how much I'm taking off. Alright, so now that we got both of those pieces flat, the next thing to do is just pass them to the planer and get the opposing face on the opposite side parallel with the face we just flattened. Now you will notice that on these pieces, you get kind of this these lines going across. And when you run your hand across it, it's going to feel like there's little waves to it. Now this doesn't matter. The reason this happens is because my jig is not perfectly set up, but what matters the most is that all these little lines, all the little waves are on the exact same wavelength basically. So they all dip down the same amount, they all come up the same amount. So then what happens is that as it's riding through the planer, all the higher faces, which are all the exact same height, are what's running across the bottom of the planer and creating that perfectly parallel surface on this other side. And so the best way to check this is if you have a table saw, just put it on the flat surface, push it back and forth on all the corners, just like you did when you're setting up in the jig, and then you're good, you're good to go. Okay, so that's both our pieces. So I'm about a 16th over my final thickness. I wanted them to be about 1 3/4 of an inch thick, and we're about, just about a 16th over, maybe just a little bit more than that. And so you don't want to go all the way down to your final thickness because you want to be able to kind of touch up here and there. So now we're going to go and joint one of the edges, and then we'll get on to actually cutting this into strips. Okay, so our first method for cutting the strips is going to be on the bandsaw. Now, the bandsaw is a little bit nicer for newbies to woodworking because it's a lot less prone to accident. Table saw, because of the way the blade spins, is much more likely to shoot pieces back at you, whereas a bandsaw, because the blade is pulling down, it's always going to be pulling your workpiece down. It's just a much generally safer way to work. The only downside to a bandsaw is they do take a little bit more knowledge to set up. They're more cost prohibitive, because I know this bandsaw right here was about $1,500, whereas you could do the same method using like a DeWalt job site saw like I was using for years. And so in some ways the bandsaw, besides the safety factor, is a better method because the blade is generally much thinner than anything you can get on a table saw. So you're generally wasting less material, which is always a good thing. And so the one downside to a bandsaw though is that because the blade is not as wide as a table saw blade, it's much more likely to wave in and out on the cut. And so normally on the table saw, because I'm going for 5/8 thick pieces, I'd set it to 5/8 and just cut off the strips that way. But because I'm using the bandsaw, I want to start with 3/4 of an inch. And so the reason I like to add 1/8 of an inch on the bandsaw is because no matter how well I tune the blade, tune the whole machine in general, I know that every once in a while it's going to dip, it's going to wave, just because, mostly because I'm pushing too hard or applying too much pressure. But setup on the bandsaw is pretty easy. All you got to do is just take your setup block, get it nice and close, but you want to make sure that you're not applying pressure to the blade. You should be able to take the block in and out, just like that. And so if you don't have setup blocks, definitely get some for your shop. You can get them in metric or imperial, and just getting the full set. I've got the Veritas set, which is everything, everything from a 32nd of an inch all the way up. It was stupid expensive, but it has saved my butt multiple times. So I definitely think they're a worthwhile investment, and you can just kind of buy the starter set and then work your way up from there. They're a great thing to have around for exactly stuff like this, where you just need to be able to set it up. So minor change of plans. I'm actually just going to do it all with the bandsaw. This is just remarkably working out very well. I was playing with my bandsaw over the weekend, and I seem to have actually tuned it up really well, where I'm not really getting any drift out of it. So I'm really impressed with how it's cutting right now, and yeah, I'm just going to keep going with it because I don't feel like setting up another machine to do the same thing that's already working well on here. Okay, so those 18 pieces that I just cut are all on the table saw, just sitting there for a moment. And so those 18 pieces are what's going to make up the carcass of our cabinet. And so these plans are, I made these up just to kind of give myself some reference. If you guys want access to them, or you would like me to make a digital copy or something, just let me know. I can do that. But they're fairly simple. I'm not really a master woodworker. I'm not really good at 3D modeling. I just kind of use SketchUp, and I literally just take screenshots of it to print it out. And so all those pieces that I just cut are what's going to make up the outside carcass. So now we need to cut the pieces for our two drawer supporting shelves, which are going to be framed, and our top shelf, which is just going to be a normal panel. So these are all different thicknesses. So our bottom two shelves are 3/8 of an inch, and our top shelf is 1/4 of an inch, and we don't need a whole lot of material for them. And so one thing I will say about the design of this case is everything is kind of designed to work together. So 18 divided by 3 is going to be 6, and so that makes up our verticals are going to be the full length pieces, and the top and bottom panels are exactly half, or not quite, but right around half of one of the side panels. And so I like working that way because, well, the 2-to-1 ratio is generally just a very appealing ratio for hanging cabinets like this. And it just is a better use of materials. I don't have to cut down multiple pieces of the 8/4 walnut and have lots of leftovers. I get to really efficiently use the 2 pieces that I planned out for this. So in total, I'm using about 4 feet of 8/4 lumber. Hazarding a guess, I would say is about $40 or $50. And I'm using that as efficiently as I possibly can with very little waste, all because I planned around doing this method in my initial drawings. Okay, and so really quickly before I start cutting on the bandsaw, because this might actually be an important thing if you guys decide to build one of these for yourself. And so for the top shelf, because it's only 12 inches long and 10 inches deep, or just under 10 inches deep, I can't just make that panel and then pass it through my planer. So what I'm going to end up doing here is I'm actually going to cut 3 pieces that are going to be the full length of this section. And then I'm going to take those 3 pieces, I'm going to glue up the panel with a little bit extra thickness. Then I'm going to plane it down to its final thickness. I'm going to cut that in half, glue up that panel again to then give me my final shelf support. Or give me my final shelf. And this just gives, again, this goes all back into best use possible of materials. Okay, so now you can see we've got all of our pieces cut out. That's everything that we're going to need for the case and the interior shelving of this cabinet that we're going to be making. And so you can start to see here why I call this fake quarter sawn is because this is actually technically quarter sawn now. So you can see on this piece here that the grain pattern is basically going vertical through this piece of wood. And so what's really great about this is, again, you are getting quarter sawn wood. The reason that I call this fake quarter sawn wood is because we're paneling it. And so it's not truly quarter sawn wood, it's a panel. But that doesn't take away from the fact that you are still getting to work with top quality quarter sawn wood without having to pay for it, because generally quarter sawn wood is extremely expensive. So that's the big difference. And because quarter sawing is such a wasteful process, a lot of companies or a lot of sawmills don't like to do it. And so not only using this method are you saving a little bit of money compared to buying actual quarter sawn wood, but you're being just better for the environment too. Because you saw off those two pieces that I had, those two 8/4 pieces, I was able to get a whole wide panel of quarter sawn wood, which is really good. And so our next step is going to be passing through the planer just so that they are all the exact same thickness. And this is going to be really important when we do the glue up, because we're going to be using cauls to make sure that these panels stay as flat as possible. And quickly before I go to the planer, I'm just going to go through and make sure that our grade direction is all going the same way. So you can see on these lines how they're going diagonal up like that. That's how I want it to be when I put it into the planer that direction. Okay, so we got everything set up for the glue up now. I'm using 2 pipe clamps. There's going to be a lot more clamps involved, but I've got these 2 set up for now. They're set up on a couple blocks of 5/8 inch MDF. And that's going to be so that I can actually get my F-style clamps underneath them when I want to clamp on the cauls. So these are what are cauls. And so all these are just it's 8/4 pieces of ash that's squared up on all 4 sides. That doesn't really matter. They just need to be perfectly flat on one face. They need to be in pairs of similar matching lengths, makes it a little bit easier. And then they're just wrapped in tuck tape or sheathing tape. And so all these do is, because they're a perfectly flat surface, when you actually apply clamping pressure between them, they make sure that your panels stay nice and flat. So now we have the fun part of actually making these and planning out these panels. So this is honestly one of the most enjoyable parts of this, because all it takes is just a little bit of thought, concentration, and effort, and it can really change how your piece comes out. And so what we want to try and do is have as straight of grains following as straight of grains. And so the interesting thing about doing it this way is every single one of these pieces has a book matched pair. Because they're all cut the same way and split, they all have a book matched pair somewhere. And so this isn't a big deal on most of them. Like this piece right here, you can see has very good straight grain. It'll pretty much match in against any one of these that also has straight grain. But some of the more problematic ones, like this guy right here, where you can see we had a knot right around this area and the grain is kind of bumped out, that one doesn't look so good when it's right up against a straight grain one. The seam becomes very obvious. So what we want to try and do with that one is find the book matched pair, which I believe is that one right there. And you can see we had a little bit of tear out in the planing process. So that means that this probably is going to be on the inside, and I don't care that much about it. So what I actually want to do is I want to make sure that the outside has a better match. I'm going to mess around for a little while, get all these laid out, planned out as best as I can, so that they look good. Okay, so I've got them all set up. You can see there's a couple spots here where I use that book matching to my advantage, just to make sure that where they kind of bow in and out, they are paired, so it's less noticeable. The seam is less noticeable. It's still kind of noticeable, but again, everything looks better once we get some finish on it, and I know for a fact how good these panels look. Once they have finish on them, you're not really going to be looking for the seams. You're not going to really notice them that much. And so all I'm going to do when I do this glue up is put glue on them, clamp them, and just leave them overnight. And so the cauls are, again, where it's going to be most important, because what I want to do when I'm clamping these up is I want to make sure that I put my cauls on first. So I want to get them tightened down as best I can first. That way, when I'm applying clamping pressure with the pipe clamps have a lot of pressure behind them. And so what can happen if you put too much pressure with the pipe clamps is your panels can start to bow up, which is a really bad thing. So if you put your cauls on before you tighten your pipe clamps, it lets you put a good amount of pressure with the pipe clamps without having to worry about anything popping out on you, which really is not fun to have happen. So I'm just going to apply slight pressure here with the pipe clamps just so that everything starts to come together and isn't going to slide around on me as much. And then I'm just going to use my other cauls to square everything up as much as I can. And the big thing here is all I want to check is that exactly these pieces right here are mostly aligned so that the book matched pieces kind of line up. The rest of it doesn't really matter that much. You're not really going to notice it. So now we want to get our cauls on nice and quick. And so when you're using cauls, you definitely want to be using F-clamps or small pipe clamps, something with a good amount of pressure behind it. Because things like quick clamps, the ones with the triggers, are not going to be strong enough to apply enough pressure here. You want a good amount of pressure being applied by those cauls. Alright, so off camera I'm going to glue up the 1/4 inch panel and the other side panel that I have to do. Just that way, saves you guys watching me do it all again. Nothing's going to be any different. I'm going to do it the exact same way. Put it in the clamps, put the cauls on. Cauls are probably the most important thing in my opinion. And probably the biggest success I've had with gluing up panels has been when I started using cauls. Definitely they make a massive difference. They do have to be hardwood though. When I first tried them, I used pine. It didn't really change that much, but definitely using good hardwood cauls that are square and 2 inches thick, you're not going to have any issues that are going to apply definitely enough all the pressure that you need them to. And so I'm going to be coming back in the shop tomorrow and we're going to be starting to actually prep these panels for the joinery. And so that means cutting the rabbets, setting up the dovetails, doing all that alignment, getting that all ready and set up to go for the next day when I'm going to come back in and actually do the dovetail work. So I do hope you guys enjoyed this video. Make sure you subscribe to follow along with this series. So I do hope you guys enjoyed this video and I will see you in the next one.